Our final speaker this evening is Mary Baldasaro. Mary is a doctor in education and a French teacher with the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, where she's also a member of the Equity and Diversity Committee. She's also a mother of 5 and a beloved storyteller in our community, and a member of the Baden Storytellers Guild. Her ability to narrate her experiences makes her stories universal, about all of us and our mothers. Her love of language, voice, and story find natural expression in teaching, as she teaches French as a second language. Storytelling, acting, and playwriting. She is a regular storyteller at Stories Aloud in the Story Barn and has performed in schools, libraries, the Toronto Storytelling Festival, Latitudes Festival, and Heart and Hand Festival. Please welcome Mary.
Careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the spell you cast. It was a spell. And we thought it was directions. Never upset anyone, anywhere, about anything. Don't do or say anything to upset people. It's a setup for disaster. And that was how we lived. So I was a sitting duck, really, when the boys in my grade 8 class started to corner me on the playground to comment on my developing body and to ask me really personal questions about cool stuff like pubic hair. And I was dying inside, dying of shame. At this point, my best friend was in hospital. She had rheumatic fever. Although I grew up in that place, we were come from a ways. Our closest family was about 1,000 miles away. My parents hadn't gone to school with any of the parents of my classmates. So although we had neighbors, we didn't have anybody there to touch base with. I couldn't tell my teacher. He was a male. Not that it was the times, and I would have felt so embarrassed. And our principal, as wonderful as she was a nun, and I didn't even know the words for it. And it was an era of sticks and stones. They might break your bones, but words will never hurt you. And I'm here to tell you, they can do an awful lot of damage. My classmates couldn't have realized at that time that we were 2 years and a half into my mother dying from breast cancer. And you know the operating adage at home. And we'd been riding a roller coaster. I was the oldest of 6 children at 12. You can picture what that was for my father at not yet 40, trying to work, take care of 6 children, and a wife who was sometimes in hospital, sometimes receiving radiation treatment, sometimes recovering at home, sometimes hopeful. We weren't telling Daddy, and so it continued. The only thing I was able to do was make sure that when I went to high school, I went where those students weren't going. And I did this. And it did eliminate that teasing. But when my mother died, it kind of left me hanging out to dry. Because for one thing, my classmates kind of got the notion that it could be contagious, this business of parental death, and they backed off quite a bit. Let's face it, as adults, we're not all that good with it. And young teenagers know even less about how to manage it. My father was struggling to figure out how to manage it too, and being away from family and being the man that he was, a wonderful dad and a sensitive man, maybe not up to the tone of the moment, he thought the best thing to do would be to make sure that all the photographs disappeared and that we didn't talk about my mother ever, and that then perhaps nobody would cry. So we entered into what I fondly refer to as the year of drunken housekeepers, when the only qualifications I can discern at this stage for getting this way cool job was that you needed to need a place to stay, and you needed to know how to use a frying pan. One of the 5 was kind. Thank you, Doris. So when my father decided to remarry, and it looked as if there were going to be regular meals, we were pretty pleased. And my stepmother, who has grown to be a wonderful person, was a little bit terrified at the prospect of taking on 6 kids. Fair enough. And knew that she'd need to get us under control. And part of this was done by ensuring that things were the way she was used to. So life changed an awful lot. We needed to speak in a different way. I suppose our speech was a little bit of a dialect because of where we came from. Food was different, although more plentiful. And everything changed. Everything in my life felt as if it was out of control, out of my control. So it only took one fairly innocuous negative comment about my body to tip me into a place where I decided, I'll take control of that. And that was delusional, because you don't take control of an eating disorder. An eating disorder kind of takes control of you, and it distorts the person you see in the mirror quite effectively, and you never quite get it back in focus. The perspective of the family was, remembering our motto, that I was being bad, really bad. And one of the ways we managed badness was to remove contact from your own brothers and sisters, because we wouldn't want to influence them in any negative ways. So there was a lot of isolation as I descended further and further into that particular hell. As confused as all get out, I'd never heard of this. I'd never seen anything like this in my life. And even I, when I could see through the funhouse mirror, could see that things were very, very seriously wrong. Well, I went to the library, the public library, to see if the medical books could help me out. And they did. They had a name for it. Anorexia nervosa. And the pictures were awful. and it didn't bode well for me if I didn't somehow get to the other side of this menace. And it took a while. By this time, I was 18 months into it, into this very small world of mine, not being a regular high school student, because no matter what it looked like on the outside, on the inside, it was terror. But I worked on it very, very deliberately. And first the pendulum had to swing further to the other side. That was frightening. And then eventually things leveled off to where I was back in the middle for me, an ectomorph anyway. But some things don't leave. There's distortion that stays. And shame, always shame. The story, if it's a story at all, was never spoken about in my family, ever. It was such a shameful thing. And I struggled at school for fear my classmates would remember that I was sick like that, don't you know? In the last few years, in reading, I've learned that this kind of thing can be thought of as a spiritual crisis. And boy, did I ever want to latch onto that, because it sounded so much nicer. But there's a part of me that resists, because we know one of the reasons that nobody wants to talk about things like eating disorders is because they fall under that wonderful umbrella of depressive disorders, which is like mental illness, which is another really scary thing to think about. And by distancing myself from that, by distancing myself and saying, oh no, you see, I really had a spiritual crisis. It wasn't that at all. It's dishonoring all the rest of the people who are going to suffer from some sort of depression or some other kind of episode in their life. And I think it's important to honor that. So all I can say is, me too. Me too. And there's power in that. What is beautiful? There's a Japanese philosophy that when you're encountering a crack in a piece of pottery or ceramic, that instead of trying to plug it with some kind of crazy glue or pretend it's not there, you paint it with gold leaf to honor its provenance. It may not hold water the way that some other things do, but it adds beauty and it adds truth, and you don't deny what is true. And I'm claiming it. I'm claiming it for myself, and I'm claiming it for everyone, and saying, no, that's how we need to honor it. Because after all, it's only because of the cracks that the light will get in. I'd like to leave you with a ballad. A ballad is a song and story. It's old. It's a couple hundred years old, and it was collected by Childs. And I'm just going to take a sip of water. Oh, the provost's daughter was walking her lane. Oh, but her love 'twas easy won when she spied a Scots prisoner making his mane, and she was the flower of Northumberland. He said, if the lady would marry me, oh, but her love 'twas easy won. I would make her a lady of high degree, if she'd loose me out of my prison so strong. So she's make her way to her father's good stocks. Oh, but her love 'twas easy won, and she's stolen a key to many's the great lock, to loose him out of his prison so strong. Then she's make her way to her father's good stable. Oh, but her love 'twas easy won, and she's stolen a horse that was both fleet and able, to carry them back to bonny Scotland. As they made their way o'er the Scots moor, he said, oh, but your love 'twas easy won. Get ye down off my horse, you're a brazen-faced whore, and you need to go back to Northumberland. Oh, it's cook in your kitchen, I surely will be, she said. Oh, though my love 'twas easy won, I cannot go back to my own country, for I was the flower of Northumberland. Oh, it's cook in my kitchen, you never will be, he said. Oh, but your love 'twas easy won, for my lady, she will not have servants like thee, and you need to go back to Northumberland. And when she got there, her father did frown and say, oh, but your love 'twas easy won, to away with a Scot, and ye barely 15, and ye were the flower of Northumberland. And when she got there, her mother did smile and say, oh, but your love 'twas easy won, but you're not the first the young Scots have beguiled, and you're welcome back home to Northumberland, and you will nae want bread, and you will nae want wine, oh, though your love 'twas easy won, and you will nae want silver for a dowry so fine, for your eye, the fair flower of Northumberland, you are still the fair flower of Northumberland. Thank you.